Hey guys, Jose here from Train Me Please, and today we are going to be talking about why desensitization and counterconditioning are amazing tools that we should all be aware of. Seriously, having a good desensitization and counterconditioning program can be life-changing for you and your dog. Let's get started. Desensitization and counterconditioning are super helpful and powerful tools that are usually used in combination. Generally speaking, if you are trying to hire someone to help you with your fearful dog and this person mentions desensitization and counterconditioning, you are probably on the right track. A little bit later in the video, I have some information about response substitution, so stay tuned for that. If you enjoyed this content, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and hit that like button. I really appreciate that. That helps me and helps other people find this content. Desensitization means exposure to a certain stimulus at a level that the individual is unlikely to demonstrate fear. Counterconditioning is a procedure that allows us to change the emotional response to a certain stimulus. It achieves this by positive pairing and associations between the potentially unpleasant stimulus, such as a person, a dog, or a bicycle, and a pleasant one, such as a food treat or a quick game of tug. The unpleasant stimulus is typically offered at a level that does not elicit a fear response, thus agreeing with our desensitization premise. Before we move forward, we should quickly mention classical conditioning because it is the main driving force behind how a desensitization and counterconditioning behavior modification plan works. Classical conditioning involves automatic responses, such as salivating in the presence of food or increased heart rate before a public talk. These responses are different than voluntary behavior, such as opening a book to have the opportunity to read it. The content of the book might elicit some automatic responses, however. It could be a sad story or a funny story, and these can trigger various reflexive responses from us. As for our dogs, here are a few quick examples. If when your dog gets in the car, you usually take her to a fun place where she can run around and have fun, the car will soon start to elicit automatic responses that we would consider pleasant. The dog has a grin on her face and there are a bunch of physiological changes taking place within her body that makes her feel joyful and excited. If, on the other hand, you usually only put the dog in the car to take her to the vet, and assuming that she does not necessarily really enjoy going to the vet, then getting in the car might elicit some unpleasant feelings in the dog. Once again, these are associated with some reflexive responses, from neurotransmitters in the brain to heart changes, etc. Note that the car itself would probably be pretty neutral to the dog. How the dog feels about getting in the car will probably be highly influenced by the types of activities that happen when the dog gets in the car. Before we continue, let me just briefly mention that food is a great tool for desensitization and counterconditioning protocols with dogs. It is a primary reinforcer. It elicits physiological changes within the dog that are associated with feeling good, and it allows us for lots of repetition. Here is a practical situation. Suppose that a dog is afraid and or reactive towards bicycles. Let's also assume here that I have a strong suspicion from previous observations that he or she will react to bicycles at a distance of about 40 meters or less, greater than 40 meters, and the dog just barely notices the bicycles and does not react. If we were to run a purely desensitization program for this dog, it could be simply about exposing him or her to bicycles at a distance of 40 to 45 meters. Later on, that distance could be brought down to 37 to 40 meters as long as we didn't see the dog showing any fear or reactivity. This might look different for each dog. Vocalizations and lunging are some possible examples. This is usually called keeping the dog under threshold. The next step could be roughly 34 to 37 meters away from the bicycle path, and so on and so forth, so that we can progressively reduce that distance. We can, however, greatly improve the success rate of the program if we include elements of counter-conditioning in it. The idea here is to pair the presence of the potentially scary thing, the bicycle in our example, with valuable things for the dog, such as food, for example. If this is done while we keep the dog under threshold, remember those distances mentioned previously, we might create a positive association with the trigger. With repeated pairings, we might get the dog to start thinking, okay, those bicycles are good news. When is the next one coming? A protocol that uses these elements that I quite like is the engage-disengage game. I will link my video on that topic here as a card and in the description under the video. Getting this dog to be relatively comfortable to be in the proximity of bicycles, let's say maybe about 5 meters away from the bicycles, would probably be extremely beneficial for the people living with this dog and for the dog. Assuming, of course, that this is a situation that would happen on a relatively regular basis, depending on where this specific situation is taking place. Now let's quickly do a human example. John does not like to make his bed in the morning. He really quite dislikes that task. Now, assume that for some magical reason, every time John makes his bed, a $100 bill suddenly appears on the bedside table. Assuming that John likes money, this procedure will totally change the way he feels about making his bed. He will start to totally love this task. And that, my friends, is the power of counter-conditioning. A bit of extra information on triggers. I like to do a bit of ping pong with the distances. That means that I am not always decreasing the distance to the trigger. That is the goal, but I like to occasionally make it a bit easier for the dog. For example, I can start at 42 meter distance, then move down to 38 meters, then 35 meters, then go up to 41 meters, then down again to 34 meters, then 37, then 32 meters, etc. Another thing to consider when applying a desensitization and counter-conditioning protocol is trigger stacking. We will need to relax our criteria and increase the reference distance if there is more than one trigger present. We may even have to do setup situations with one trigger at a time before mixing them up if there are several triggers for this specific dog. For example, if the dog has mastered the engage-disengage game at a 30 meter distance from bicycles, but the dog is also reactive to baby trolleys, we would keep that in mind and possibly move him to a 45 meter distance if we see bicycles and baby trolleys happening at the same time in the same location. We might even need to consider 3 or more triggers, how each specific trigger moves and what noise they are making. If the situation does not allow to adjust the distances to stay on the threshold and to apply proper counter conditioning, or even if there are too many triggers, for example, all of a sudden there's several bicycles, people and other dogs, we should probably simply try to distract the dog and get out of the situation as quickly as we could. We should then reassess the situation, possibly come back at another time, or even change the training plan. Okay, let's mention response substitution now. Response substitution refers to the process by which we replace an undesirable behavioral response by a desirable one. In the engage-disengage game, we usually replace a hard stare with a tense body posture with a disengagement behavior, such as looking away from the trigger or looking at us. This procedure is also often referred to as DRI, differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior, and it has many applications. For example, if you do not want your dog to jump when you come home through the door, you can teach her that sitting, lying down, or stationing is the way that will trigger you to offer some attention. With that said, we should not forget to consider our environment and antecedent arrangement so that the behavior we want is likely to be displayed in the first place. For the dog that is afraid of bicycles, that means that we set up the situation with enough distance so that engagement and disengagement behaviors are very likely to be displayed. We mainly spoke about dogs and bicycles in this video, but you can obviously change your reference trigger, and all of this should still be totally applicable. Let me take a second here to thank everyone that has been subscribing, liking, and sharing my videos. I really appreciate it. And let me know in the comment section below if there is any topic that you would like me to cover in any upcoming videos. Thanks so much for watching this one. I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers!